on our virtual CP meeting on GST assessment and 9 and 9C key aspects. We have with us Advocate Bhupendra Singh to guide us on this particular topic. I also acknowledge the presence of our past convener, Sir Nikun Sir, who will be giving the profile of speaker, Sir. Nikun Sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sheetal Madam. Very good afternoon to all the members. Hope you're all well. I know today is the match, so we have. I am thankful to the committee and the conveners and deputy convener to properly time the event, so that पहले पढ़ाई कर लो, फिर मैच देखने से कोई नहीं रोक सकता. Okay. I'm really happy to have Bhupendra ji with us today to share his views and knowledge on this very essential topic. Bhupendra is the managing partner of Artham Law Chambers PLC. He has advised MNCs and domestic clients, including SMEs, in the field of taxation, international trade, and commercial laws. His legal expertise is spread over a period of 14 years, and he has advised clients in FS, aviation, transport and logistics, TMT, FMCG and pharma, oil and gas, chemical sector. Wow, the list is huge. Bhupendra has advised companies in pre-GST era and also during GST transition. He was part of the core team which prepared a comprehensive document highlighting probable GST challenges in 2017. This said document was presented to the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. He has also worked with various domestic and international funds, advising them on various legal and procedural aspects. Since July 17, Bhupendra has been assisting multiple clients on matters pertaining to tax technology for GST compliances, GST audits and assessments, representation, and litigation advisory, including at High Courts and Supreme Court of India. His cross-sector experience has helped him in bringing holistic solutions on table for various commercial and business issues faced by industry at large. He's a regular speaker with ICI, SOCHAM, and USIIC, etc. With this, I would like to welcome him again on this platform. Thank you so much, Bhupendra ji. Over to you, Sheetal Madam.
Sir, we would love to hear the topic from you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Nikunj. Thanks, Sheetal. Thank you so much, Sheetal. And thanks to the CP Circle for inviting me for today's session on GST 99C and GST audit and assessment. As Nikunj said, yes, it's big day, India-Pakistan match. And I think more than that, it's one of, I would say in my personal experience of last 14 odd years, it's one of the tricky days to make a presentation or discussion. Because we have got India-Pakistan match, you have got Karwa Chauth, you have got lockdown, and of course post-lunch session, right? So too many expectations, but I hope that I'll be able to explain many aspects. Either it's in relation to GST 99C or GST audits and assessments, which many of you would have observed has started picking up the heat from the government department. With this kind of brief setting the context, I'll start my presentation and discussion. So what I'm going to do is that I'm first going to take GST 9 and 9C. Now the purpose to take 9 and 9C first is that 9 and 9C eventually can lead to GST audits and assessment. So we'll spend maybe 40 to 45 minutes to understand 9 and 9C. Many of you, I'm sure, would have definitely handled 9 9C in last 3 to 4 years. What I'm planning to do is that I'm not going to do just kind of form reading. I'll just share my experiences, exactly what I have faced in last say 3.5 years, those tricky items in goods as well as service sector, and what could be the alternative ways of looking at 9 9C, considering the fact that you have got GST Act on one side, while the forms 999C on the other side. So with this, I'll just give me 1 second. I'll share my screen and then we can jump onto our discussions. I hope my screen is clear.
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible.
Just bear with me for a second, please.
No problem.
Right. Sorry, I hope screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Good. Thanks. All right, so we'll quickly kind of jump into a GSTR 9 and 9C, what we call as annual return and GST audit. Now, again, as we know, the primary reason of 9 and 9C, again, when the GST laws were being, the first draft was released in 2016, and when the final law came out in 2017, government's main objective was very simple, that at the end of the year, all the taxpayers have to effectively self-assess all their liabilities, and they have to give a reconciliation. Now, for the goods industry, it was not a big thing to do because previous in the pre-GST era also, the goods industry was always handling these kind of annual returns in the form of VAT or CST. So the goods industry was somewhere kind of aligned in this whole process of annual returns, but it was a big massive change for the service industry. Because effectively from two half-yearly returns, first the service industry was getting into a monthly return, that to multiple returns in a single month. And coupled with that was this annual return and the GST audit. Now, what effectively it means for all the taxpayers in India, which is for annual return and GST audit. If you look at annual return is nothing but, it's a sum total of all your monthly returns, which is as of today GSTR1 and GSTR3. And then you have the GSTR9 format, that what all data has to come in what form and fashion. But when we look at the GST audit piece, which is GSTR9C, the major thing in GST audit or 9C is that it's nothing but an effective reconciliation statement at a state level. So what it effectively means is that you have to go top-down approach where you look at the financial statements of the company at the entity level, then you drill down at the state level, and then you do a reconciliation. In my experience, the reconciliation boils down to 3 points. One is the reconciliation of your financial statement with GST returns, which, as I mentioned, you do a top-down approach, take the financial statements and do the reconciliation with returns. And when we say GST returns, the reconciliation effectively is with the annual return, which is GSTR9. Because your financial statements are on an annual basis, GSTR9 again is on an annual basis. You compare to reconcile and see if there could be any differences in what's reported in financial statement vis-a-vis what's reported in GSTR9. How it can impact the overall reconciliation we'll discuss in the subsequent slides. Then the second one is the reconciliation of certain specific transactions, which may be there in financial statements, but not there in GST returns, or vice versa, where something is there in GST returns, but it is not there in your financial statements. This second reconciliation assumes quite a lot of significance in my experience, because what happens is that there are many transactions where there's a deeming fiction in GST laws, wherein the transaction becomes liable to tax, even though at an entity level or at the state level, the company is not recognizing any revenue. Classic case, a stock transfer. Now, in stock transfer, your financial statements, there's no revenue as such, but you will see a GST liability reported as part of GSTR1 and 3. So even though someone might have paid the tax through 1 and 3B, but because it's not appearing in your financial statement, there is bound to be a gap. The challenge is that when you compare, or at the first shot, when you look at the revenue in financial statement, vis-a-vis revenue in GSTR9, most likely than not, the difference would be significant because of the bullet point P, where many transactions are on this side, while they are not on the other side. So what it effectively means for all of us is that definitely we have to be very mindful and careful about the transactions, the missing transaction in financial statement but appearing in GSTR9, and something which is there in 9 but not in financial statements. So those transactions have to be properly reported as well. So it's not the case that we just have a backup saying that, okay, I know what kind of reconciliation would lead to this kind of match or mismatch, but we also need to keep the records that what is the reason and basis why we feel that those transactions are genuine transactions and will definitely lead to some sort of a taxability or non-taxability as the case may be. And why I'm saying that it's important, I'll explain it in more detail when going to GST audits and assessment, because the starting point of any audit and assessment as of today is your GST 9 and 9C. Last and not the least here in the reconciliation part is the vendor reconciliation. I think most of us know about this whole vendor reconciliation. Even though we went live on GST on 1st July 2017, the effective reconciliation started happening only somewhere in September, October 2018. Also visible from the government's intent that since 2017, the annual return 9 and 9C dates have been extended primarily on account of the incorrect GSTR 2A, which is effectively your vendor returns coming as part of your input tax credit. The gap in the GSTR 2A which was available or which was appearing in the government portal. Now, why vendor reconciliation assumes significance is on account of two reasons. Reason number one, of course, no doubt about it that if there's something not appearing in the government portal as a receiver, I am not entitled to take the credit. This is the absolute law under GST. But the second reason, which is more important, is that if we have taken credit by mistake, and later on we are not able to reconcile, and then the government officer picks it up saying that, hey, your vendor did not pay tax. So first you have taken credit, that's okay. But under the GST law, you are also liable to pay that tax on behalf of your vendor. So it becomes extremely important that all the vendor reconciliation activities are done on a periodic basis and not just as an year-end activity. And what I'm seeing in last specifically, 2019 and 2020 beginning, from the department side, this is a low-hanging fruit. What the government authorities are doing, they just take up GSTR 2A. At the back end with their data analytics, they exactly know how many vendors of a particular taxpayer has not paid taxes or the credit has been incorrectly applied. And there the government authorities know that the moment a communication is issued to the actual recipient of goods or services, either he will immediately reverse the input tax credit or he'll pay it up in cash. So it's a win-win situation for the government authorities. So the reconciliation or the vendor reconciliation assumes extremely significant part in this whole exercise of GSTR 9 and 9. Just a suggestion, in case there's any question, please feel free to kind of interject or chip in. I would be happy to answer those questions during the discussions. Right. Moving on, what effectively it means for the chartered fraternity is that at the end of the day, all your GSTR 9 and 9C effectively becomes responsibility. Definitely the primary responsibility is of the taxpayer, but at the same time, it's an equal responsibility somewhere of the chartered accountant who's certifying the 9C. Because 9C you are not certifying standalone. You're looking at GSTR 9, comparing it with 9C, and then you're certifying ABC things. So it has to be absolutely ensured that there's a true and correct declaration of the data either as part of financial statement or as part of a GST. So here, I'll just give one incident and I'll leave it there just to highlight the impact of this declaration. You must have read in many, unfortunate incidents wherein the incorrect input tax credit, which is kind of moving in the economy. It's not just the companies which are being kind of looked at. The government authorities are also looking at the chartered accountants and other professionals who might have kind of looked at GSTR 9/9C or might be handling the accounting side as well. So extremely important on all of us as professionals that we are absolutely sure of what we are certifying, because there is no guarantee during audits and assessment. The government authorities might also come back to us as professionals asking us the basis on which we would have certified ABC. For the running year 2025, I think it's a known fact that threshold, the monetary threshold to trigger GST 9/9 is 5 crores. And the threshold here we are talking about is at entity level. So again, I think majority of the companies will get covered in this threshold, and hence 9 and 9C will trigger. Again, towards the end of the slide, we have touched upon the fact that now 9C has become optional, which means it is going on a self-certification basis. But we'll explain slightly in detail what would be the pros and cons of this self-certification maybe towards the end of this discussion. Well, now moving on to, first we'll take up the GSTR 9 per se. Now, GSTR 9, again, as I mentioned, broadly, if you look at GSTR 9, philosophically, principally, as well as from the form perspective, it's quite simplistic. It doesn't require, this a holistic approach or, complete data analysis that okay, what exactly has to go in GSTR 9. GSTR 9 is effectively all your annual monthly returns, which you would have filed or someone, your clients would have filed in a particular financial year. So you take up GSTR 1, you take up GSTR 3B and 2A, and there you see that, okay, what kind of sales, purchases would have been reported on a month-on-month basis, and then ultimately it gets reported into GSTR 9. At the same time, it's my experience that we should not and must not look at GSTR 9 as a mere consolidation activity. What I have observed in my experience is that whenever we look at something GSTR 9 as a mere consolidation activity, there's a bright possibility that when you are approaching 9C, where you have to do the reconciliation of financial statements, you might figure out that in financial statements some number is coming, which inadvertently or otherwise would not have been reported in your monthly returns. So the best way is that don't look at it as a consolidation activity. Do it if you are handling the entire 9C, start from the very basic bare minimum, the GL with your monthly return with the financial statements. That will make sure it will give you that comfort that when you're heading towards GSTR 9C, it's more comfortable position that okay, you would have already seen the backup documents of the past. And in this monthly return, again, as appearing on the screen, it's the actual supplies which have happened, including the deemed supply. Please note the deemed supply is a concept, in my experience with the SME sector, in initial 2.5 years. People were not much aware about the deemed supplies, which are part of Schedule 1 of the CGST Act. And it took some time to explain them first the type of deemed supplies and the reason in terms of reporting it into 9 and 9C. So be mindful about the deemed supply while preparing GSTR. Now, next point here is the differential tax liability. And that's where, as a professional, the chartered accountant's role becomes very important in this whole kind of activity. Because after undertaking the 9 and 9C activity, if you come to know that, okay, there is a potential tax liability, either in terms of input tax credit incorrectly availed or some transactions not getting reported in GSTR 1 and hence the tax was not paid. Now, in all these cases, it is the responsibility of the auditor, which is the GST auditor, to highlight that tax liability, and such tax liability has to be reported through GSTR 9. Now, here is the catch. The catch is that you will identify the tax liability only after you would have undertaken the reconciliation with financial statements. So, financial statement reconciliation is your 9C, where you will figure out if there's any outstanding liability. But that outstanding liability has to come back in GSTR 9. And then in GSTR 9, you have to, as auditor, you have to give reasons that why there is a differential tax liability. And you will also have to confirm that such tax liability has been paid. Now, when we talk about the tax liability, the differential tax liability, we have had, interesting back and forth discussion with the government authorities on DRC 03. So when the instructions came out for first year 17-18, July 17 to March 18, the instruction said that any tax liability has to be paid in cash by filing DRC 03. Now, being the first year of GST, many companies were sitting with huge accumulated ITC. So when we went and told our clients that, hey, there's a differential tax liability inadvertent, of course, you'll have to pay it in cash, the companies took a step back. They were like that, I have got accumulated credit. If I would have been mindful in a particular month, I would not have paid in cash, I would have utilized my input tax credit. So why there is an insistence on discharging this liability through cash? And that is where the instruction came out, which clearly said that the differential tax liability has to be paid through DRC 03 and that too in cash. But when you go onto the government portal and you select DRC 03, in the form DRC 03, it gives you both options. One is payment through cash, and the second one is payment utilizing your credit. And this is where the gap is. Your instruction says that pay in cash, government portal is allowing you credit and cash both. So which option to pick up? Legally and technically, neither the CGST Act nor the CGST rules provide that for GSTR 9, the DRC 034 GSTR 9 should be only in cash. So many companies have taken a view that I can still utilize my input tax credit because the GST Act and rules are absolutely silent in the manner in which I should pay my taxes. And hence, companies in last 3 to 4 years have been paying additional or differential tax liability, utilizing credit, but still filing DRC 03. The next part on GSTR 9 is the unclaimed ITC, which is nothing but your previous year's ITC, which for XYZ reasons would not have been taken in that financial year, but you're claiming it in the subsequent financial year. Again, just a point, an important point, but most of you must be aware. Such unclaimed ITC of the previous financial year has to be taken on or before 30th September of the subsequent financial year. So no way that it can go beyond 30th September. The law is absolutely clear. And we know, as a matter of fact, few companies said that it's my inherent right to claim credit. Once I've received the goods or services, I've got invoice, I've made payment to the vendor. So I should not be held back from taking the credit even before 30th September. But the law says 30th September. And in a different and unrelated note, Bombay High Court under Maharashtra VAT had held that if the law is worded in a particular fashion where the government requires the taxpayers to do something, it has to be complied with. No one can say that the law is unjust as long as the law is equally applicable on all the taxpayers. So our view or our advice has been that for unclaimed ITC, 30th September should be a cutoff date, and hence we report it on GSTR 3B of September to be filed by 20th October. So here there is a question where from one of the participants that many auditors are not reporting on 180 days payment not made, which attracts ITC reversal clause. What standard department is taking on that? A very valid question. Now, standard of the department is absolutely clear. And you know, that's where I mentioned about this whole technology driven thing. Is that department, number one, is asking data from the company in terms of SAP or sorry, any ERPs. And then if they have any doubt, they've started asking payment masters. Now, payment master, most of you must be aware, it is nothing but a master data which tells you at invoice level for every vendor within how many days a particular invoice was paid or not paid. Wherever the payment master, which is an auto-generated report from your ERP, it says for say X number of transactions more than 180 days, the department's first step is they will ask, did you reverse the credit? If we say yes, we did reverse the credit, they are asking for the proof of reversal, either through an accounting entry or in GSTR 3B. And if they are not convinced or satisfied, then they are, at least at this stage, they are going ahead and raising that demand that this credit, which was where the vendor was unpaid for more than 180 days, was incorrectly availed, incorrectly utilized, so pay with differential interest. So that's the departmental stand. There's a larger concept or legal concept here that if I always had the credit balance, significant credit balance, should the interest still also trigger? But that's a matter which I think only the courts of law in the due course of time will identify and figure out or lay down the principles that how to handle the interest liability. All right, so GSTR 9 is effectively broken up into 4 parts: outward, inward, amendments, and any other information, which is primarily your differential tax liability related information, and also the tax amounts which have been paid during the year. Other than that, in GSTR 9, as I mentioned, may look simpliciter, but at the same time, we still have to pay more attention. And in my experience, and I'm hopeful or rather sure that you have had the similar experience, do not rely 100% on GSTN or the network generated auto-populated GSTR 9. More than 90% of the cases, you will always find the difference. It's a good start, which is the government portal auto-populated GSTR 9, but definitely have your own working so that you're absolutely sure that GSTR 9 is as per what you have actually filed. Now, moving on to certain key points, which we have to be mindful while preparing the GSTR 9. The whole thing is that in GSTR 9, what we have to effectively identify is that, okay, what all activities we have to do. I think a couple of these activities I've already highlighted, discussed in last couple of minutes. No doubt about it, all of us must be aware, GSTR 9 has to be at a state level. It cannot be at an entity level. For each state registration where you are filing your monthly returns, you need to have a GSTR 9 to that extent. And for as of now, for 2021, the due date is 31st December. Let's see if the date gets extended. Currently, we have not heard directly or indirectly from any of the state authorities or the central authorities in Maharashtra and other states that the time limit will be extended. So the expectation is, best case situation, it will not get extended. Worst case, maybe month or 45 days. Vendor reconciliation, we spoke about it. It has to be prim and proper because mismatch in your vendors or input tax credit can lead to significant interest liability. See, professionally, okay, if someone has inadvertently taken the credit, he is liable to reverse, no doubt about it. But the interest cost is huge, up to 24%, right? So it becomes important that we are not just saving or kind of supporting our clients in doing the reconciliation, but also helping them in arbitraging this interest cost of 24%, because if the credit is to be reversed, there is no way where interest will not be required. That's how the law is, and that's how it is getting implemented. GSTR 9, no point or no scope for amendment, same as GSTR 1, 3 or any other return under GST laws. Another one is the commercial credit notes. Now, commercial credit notes, is a unique kind of transaction which mostly happens in service industry. What it effectively means that I am not claiming any tax adjustment. So when I issue a GST credit note, I will reduce my GST liability in light of the credit note, and the buyer will reduce his input tax credit. And because it is a proper tax adjustment on outward as well as inward, so it has to be properly reported and it has to be part of a 130 and hence 990. But commercial credit notice, I'm seeing that for my total invoice value of 118, 100 plus 18 of GST, in lump sum, you give me only 108. So there, I'm not saying as a seller of goods or supplier of services, I'm not giving any GST benefit. It's a commercial arrangement where instead of 118, I am agreeing on a lower amount of 102. And if the customer agrees, I just issue a commercial credit note with a differential of 16 rupees. Now, because this commercial credit note is not getting any tax benefit, which is a GST benefit, there is no requirement to either disclose it into the monthly returns, nor there is a requirement to report in 990. But at the same time, it will also form part of your reconciliation because somewhere your financial statements would have given this reflection of commercial credit notes. So in our experience, all these commercial credit notes, whenever in cases where we have seen that difference is huge, when we compare financial statement vis-a-vis GST returns, we make sure that the auditors mention a reason that X amount is on account of commercial credit notes, which do not have any GST impact and hence not reported. Then we have got assessable value, I think a practical position as well as a legal one, where if you are looking at the invoice value and any other value which might have been recorded in your books of accounts, you have to report the invoice value which will have attracted GST at the time of supply. ITC classification, it's an interesting kind of point because even though the law has provided since beginning again that your input tax credit should be split into input services, inputs, and capital goods. The returns, monthly returns also somewhere mentioned that you should give your credit details in these three categories. But as an economy, I'm not just pointing out to one company or industry, but as an economy, in first 2 years or so, everyone thought that, okay, this classification is next to impossible. My systems do not support me. And on what basis should I classify? Because if I classify something in one category in GST laws, my accounting treatment should not get impacted. So no one kept this split of inputs, input services, and capital goods. And heavy representation was made to the Ministry of Finance requesting to remove this ITC classification from 990. But Ministry of Finance did not agree to it, and as of today also, the classification has to be given when we are filing GSTR. So it becomes a check the box kind of approach, and we are following it for the last 1.5 or 2 years, that if the companies who did not in the past have this kind of classification, we have brought them on board to get this classification to a great extent. And wherever there's some new ERP or system change, then we are requesting that at the time of change in system, we should have this kind of classifications. Same goes with the HSN or service accounting code summary. Again, part of my GSTR 1, but mostly companies did not follow it in the monthly returns, but in GSTR 9, it's a mandatory fee. So you have to give that summary. And the larger thing is that, there were a few situations where people said that, okay, ITC classification as well as the classification summary. What I will do, I'll give you some hypothetical breakup where if my total GSTR 1 turnover is 100 rupees, I will give 80 rupees into specific HSN and 20 rupees into SSC. You please report that into GSTR 9. The challenge is that tomorrow during GST audit and assessment, if the authorities pick up this kind of random allocation of HSN and SSC, and God forbid, if this change in or different classifications, different GST rates, most likely than not, the authorities will think that there was some nullified intent by the taxpayer while misclassifying goods into a particular HSN or services into a particular SSC. So we literally withheld ourselves to give any kind of random allocation, and we just went back into the system and kind of had to do some activities to dug out the whole information on the classification. So in my practical experience, it is suggested not to go with any random allocation either for input tax credit or for outward supplies. To the extent possible, get the specific details, and if something is not available, you always have the option of giving reasons in GSTR 9 itself. Then in few of the situations, what we felt or observed is that non-taxable or rather non-GST supplies, say petroleum products or alcoholic products, they were not reported in the monthly returns. And because the monthly returns did not have that kind of reporting, GSTR 9 was not matching. So what we did is that, of course, we had to give the details of non-GST exempt and other supplies. So we mentioned everything in GSTR 9 and put a comment that, again, inadvertently in monthly returns, these were not reported. So do not think that if something was not reported in GSTR 1, it should not be reported in GSTR 9. Because if you don't report something in GSTR 9, your reconciliation will be huge when you do the financial statement misinformation. So if something was not done in monthly returns, do it in GSTR 9 and mention the reason that why it was not done in GSTR 1. If there's no tax impact, no tax officer or authority, hopefully, and ideally should pick it up and raise questions around it. The last piece is in terms of the GSTR 3B and the differential tax liability. This we have already discussed, which is your DRC 03, whether you should pay in cash or should you utilize the input tax. All right, so in GSTR 9, moving on to the next piece that, of course, it's more standard and more or less it's streamlined, but there are certain things where still some sort of additional legwork or the additional efforts have to put in. One, and the first and foremost is the HSN or SSC details. Even today, most of the companies do not have these details because of various reasons. It could be system driven, or it could be, at a policy level, companies might think that, okay, everything is appearing in my invoice. Why should I create a separate summary? The another one is the ineligible credit details. Now, ineligible credit details, when we'll go into GSTR 9C, we'll see that in 9C, the form provides that all your expenses should be categorized into 8 or 9 categories. And that total expense, which is spread across 8 or 9 categories, should match with your financial statement. So one is the expense, the total value of the expense. Then it says that, okay, the GST component on that expense. And there's a last column which talks about the eligible credit. So out of, let's say, 18 rupees GST, was the company entitled to claim entire 18 rupees as credit or lower than 18 rupees? And the reason is that if it is lower than 18 rupees, then ideally it should match either in your GSTR 3B reversal or it should match with your input tax credit reconciliation statement, which forms part and parcel of 9 and 9C. So many companies do not even retain this ineligible credit details because as an internal accounting point of view, something which is not creditable, we just expense it out. And once we expense it out, we do not maintain the records. We think that, okay, it becomes part and parcel of my cost of goods sold or the cost of services provided. So we have been harping and we are going back again and again requesting the companies and clients that at least some details of ineligible credit should be there in the system, so that tomorrow in audits and assessment, it can be helpful. Otherwise, we are looking at some unnecessary kind of queries or questions from the authorities. ITC classification, we just spoke about it in slight detail. And the last piece on this, the additional work which has to be done on GSTR 9 is the separate details or the specific details which we have to provide in respect to composition dealers, job work, and goods which would have been sent on approval basis but not returned. The reason for this last piece of goods sent for approval but not returned is that if it is not returned, then automatically the GST liability triggers. Till date, in last 4.5 years, I have not seen any company saying that okay, goods were sent for on approval basis and they were never returned. All the companies, they have made sure that if something went on approval basis, it actually came back within the specified period of time. Now, I'll just take a pause here before we move into GSTR 9. See if there are any questions on GSTR 9, happy to answer other than 180 days, or if there's any follow-up question. Otherwise, we'll move into GSTR 9.
We can move ahead, Bhupender ji. No queries on the chat box.
Oh, thanks. Okay, now moving on to GSTR 9C. As I mentioned, it's a huge exercise. The company size could be small, medium, or big, right? But at the end of the day, depending on the company size, the data and documents will also reflect the size of the company. And the reconciliation activity assumes significance in our professional lives, because this is something which we are certifying that everything is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief, of course. But I have seen in pre-GST era, in one of the refund matters, certain certificates were issued by one of the chartered accountants in Mumbai. And when that particular company was getting investigated for some incorrect tax payments and incorrect refund claims, the commissioner of service tax in Mumbai, he had actually summoned the chartered accountant also. And the CA also had to give a statement and had to submit all the information. So with this personal come professional experience of mine in pre-GST era, I won't be surprised that going forward in GST, for any information, the CA or the accountant who would have certified 9C is also summoned by the GST authorities. So we have to be mindful about this whole reconciliation activity and how it can impact us as professionals on a longer basis. So now coming to the GSTR 9C, the broad workflow is that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, it's a top-down approach. We pick up the entity level statement, we break it down at a state-wise trial balance. Now, state-wise trial balance is becoming an interesting topic for discussion with the government authorities. Because what actually happened in 17, 18 and the subsequent years, and more so in the service industry, companies did not have a state-wise specific trial balance. So what the companies did, they effectively created some sort of pseudo trial balance, which was nothing but a reflection of their GSTR 1, 3, and 2. And that document was prepared just to ensure that GSTR 9, 9C activity is undertaken. And at the same time, the service industry or the service companies did not have to make any system changes. But now, during the ongoing assessments and audits, departmental authorities are asking a trial balance with the same look and feel what we get in a goods sector company or as per the accounting norms. So there are many service companies which are struggling to explain the officers that a state-wise trial balance is not possible in service industry, but the authorities are still asking for those. And of course, those discussions are ongoing, and we have made a representation also to the Ministry of Finance. But till the time any clarification comes, there is a possibility that the authorities might insist on a trial balance, which we see in an accounting norm and not as per the GST law. The second step is that when we do the financial statement with the GSTR 9, which is your state-wise trial balance, in parallel, the tax ledger reconciliation also has to happen, because this is where you will actually get to know if there is any kind of unpaid tax or excess credit which might have been utilized. And once the tax ledger reconciliation has been undertaken, what we have to do is holistic final reconciliation, which is the entity level reconciliation with the statewide registers, where registers are maintained. And if it is not, state-wise registers are not maintained, then we have to look at the trial balance which would have been prepared. I'll just take a pause here and I'll give you another instance where the state-wise trial balance has become a bone of contention is with reference to the foreign airlines and the shipping companies. Now, most of the airlines, foreign airlines and shipping companies, they work under the model of a branch office. Now, effectively, it means they do not have any legal entity set up in India. They are a representative office of their head office. Now, since 2017, uh, they have been making a representation to the government that 9 and 9C should not be applicable on the branch offices. And the reason is correct also, because they do not have any financial statement like a P&L balance sheet. They simply have a receipt and payment account, which is also maintained at the location where the bank account is maintained. So such foreign airlines and foreign shipping companies have been making representations to the government. Last year, government gave a slight kind of relaxation, and they highlighted that instead of a 9C, you can also submit your own state level trial balance. So 9C as an activity is gone out of window for such foreign shipping lines and airlines, but at the same time, the government in the same notification has asked to submit a state-wise trial balance or a receipt and payment account. So it's unfortunate or rather ironical that these companies moved from filing of 9C, which was one kind of mud, into another one, which is to give state-wise receipt and payment, because they still don't maintain state-wise receipt and payment. So the representation is on, and the whole thing is that there cannot be any reconciliation at state level with the branch level, which is the main corporate office of the branches. Now, till the time it happens, what we have advised or how these companies are working is that they are again preparing state-wise receipt and payment. And in 80% and above cases, that state-wise receipt and payment is a pure reflection of 132 and 2. So the principle which I'm trying to highlight here is that there will be unique situations wherein 9 and 9C will have to be looked at differently. And we have to be mindful that exactly to what extent an alternative interpretation can be taken. Because at the end of the day, 9/9C still flows from the GST Act. And wherever an alternative interpretation is being taken, just to prove or showcase that as a taxpayer or as our client, we have bona fide belief, we have always made sure to file some sort of communication or letter with the jurisdiction office, so that tomorrow there should not be question on our intentions that we wanted to do something which was not permissible in law. Right, coming back to the workflow, now I'm on step 4, the identification of differences. Now, identification of differences 9C in its form, it gives you complete reasons. There are some listed 6 or 7 reasons wherein you can give the data point, which is the numbers, that A, B, C are the reason because of which the differences are arising. The best part in 9C is table 5.0. It reads other reasons for adjustment. And this is, effectively saving risk for everyone in the professional world, because there are times when we know that there is a difference, but we don't know this difference is on account of what reasons. So most of the time we end up using table 5.4 and highlight that, okay, the difference, we don't know the reason, but here is the difference. As a best practice, what we do is that if there is no tax liability on account of the difference, then we clearly mention in the notes or the reason column that even though the difference is there, there is no tax liability because of XYZ reasons. So, and the reason is very simple why we do that is that this 9/9C gets uploaded on the government portal, the jurisdiction officer will look at it, and the first thing he will do is that the reason for differences. And wherever there is a reason, or wherever there is a difference, he will not apply his mind, he will just send out the communication that please give the reasons. So we try to bring down or contain that kind of a damage at the first step itself. Review of rate-wise tax liability. This is where another place where we feel that auditor's responsibility is quite high, because what 9C expects is that there has to be some sort of an affirmation by the auditor that the company has paid taxes at the applicable rate. Now the rate could be 5, 12, 18, 28, whichever. But the affirmation has to go as a certification process of GST or 9C. It becomes difficult in certain situations where the rates have seen significant changes in last 4.5 years. And it's becoming more difficult now because of so many advanced rulings on the classification and tax rate. So our suggestion generally is that if as auditors you are not able to kind of give a pinpointed response, take it as part of the management representation MR, saying that whatever you have reviewed is basis these given facts. And if you are aware about any negative advance ruling, just mention that. So that again, we are trying to ring fence ourselves that tomorrow if their question comes to us, then we should have an appropriate answer. And the last piece is, again, I go back to my first statement, which is certain transactions which are not appearing in either financial statements or in GSTR 9. And there we need to have a reason as well as the reconciliation. A classic example is a stock transfer or a cross charge, because whenever we are doing a stock transfer or cross charge, it is not my financial statement kind of a transaction. It is just a GST transaction. A related point to this is that somewhere the way 9C is kind of notified by the government, it also requires somewhere the auditor to certify that the value is also valid. And many of my CA friends have asked that is this a mandatory obligation that I have to verify or certify the valuation? The answer is no. It's just the format of 9C. It does not mean that you have actually looked into the valuation of such transaction and you are certifying that the valuation is correct. That's not the intention. You're just certifying you have seen cross charge or stock transfer transactions and whether the tax is paid or not. That's the limited objective of Form 9C. Now, just jumping into some specific details of GSTR 9C. Now, GSTR 9C, again, something similar to GSTR 9. We can look at it from two angles. One is reconciliation of your outward, another one is reconciliation of your inward, which is your input tax credit. Now, in the outward side, what you see on the left-hand side of the screen is your part 2 of GSTR 9C, which talks about a financial statement with annual returns. Annual return being GSTR 9. The biggest difference will always come in the first two bullet items, which is unbilled revenue and unadjusted advances. And this is more so in case of a service industry, because the unbilled revenue is quite a lot in IT, ITS sector, where the work is constantly going on, but it is still not billed out, because it could be continuous supply of service, or it's a mere case where my milestone to bill is after 3 months, maybe of the completion of the service, right? So that unbilled revenue will somewhere sit into your financial statements as part of your accrued revenue or accrued income, but it will not come in your GSTR 9 because it's not there in 1 and 3. So that entire unbilled revenue as a practice, what we do is that we take the complete details that what is the reason for this unbilled revenue, and we check some sample contracts to see that there is no violation of the point of taxation. In the sense that we see that if it is a continuous supply of service, the milestone was post the end of the financial year. But again, just to get a comfort for ourselves that in the garb of unbilled revenue, some actual taxable revenue is not being hidden or has not been put under the carpet. Same is the case with unadjusted advances, advances which you would have or the companies would have taken during the year, but they are still open at the end of the year. We have to give complete details of such unadjusted advances. Same approach you follow the way we do for unbilled revenue. Look at the complete data and check through sample transactions. And we generally apply 80-20 principle. We take a few transactions, say 10 to 20% of the transactions, which can account for 80% of such unadjusted advances. The next one is the deemed supply. I think I've spoken a lot on deemed supply. So deemed supply, as I mentioned, is part of Schedule 1, something which is not your revenue item, but it's a taxable transaction. So all these deemed supply transaction form come in GSTR 9, not in financial statements. So you have to match that gap. Then credit notes, which are issued after the end of the financial year, which is from April to September, and hence it gets reflected in your annual return. So that becomes another kind of a comparison, because on your GSTR 9, you have to give in other information section, which we had discussed or touched upon in the previous slide. In other information, we have to give details of any kind of adjustment which would have happened during April to September. So what might be a situation that you would have accounted something as revenue as on 31st March 21, but as of 31st May 21, within 2 months, because of credit note, that amount is gone. So to that extent, we'll have to kind of highlight such kind of credit note, commercial and GST. And the last piece is any valuation principles, either in terms of the related party or in terms of cross charge, or many a times indirect related party transaction. So there the valuation principles and also the value of such transactions has to be reconciled. Just to kind of connected point here on valuation also, as of now, either in terms of advanced tooling or in terms of audits and assessment where we are deeply involved, till date, authorities have not questioned the basis or manner of this kind of valuation, which effectively means that either related party transaction or cross charge, no question has been asked. But the way the rate structure has moved quite a lot in last 4.5 years, I professionally believe that there could be some transaction where department might pick up because of a lower valuation, there could be some tax advantage. So we just have to wait and watch and see those kind of transactions. But till date, valuation has not been picked up as a topic of discussion, which was the case in erstwhile Central Excise and Customs even as of today. The next part of this whole reconciliation of taxable turnover is your actual GST turnover, which is the taxable turnover vis-a-vis non-taxable. Non-taxable will include zero rated, exempt, non-GST, no supply, these transactions. But at the end of the day, all such transactions will also form part of the revenue in the financial statements. So it becomes another major kind of reconciliation item where something is not there in GST 9 as a taxable output, but it is appearing significantly in your revenue and financial statement. Classic example, oil and gas industry, petroleum products, where majority of the petroleum products such as diesel, petrol, they are non-taxable, but at the same time 10 to 15% of revenue is taxable. So companies reporting crores, thousands and thousands of crores of rupees in their revenue or financial statements, reporting mainly few crores as part of their taxable liability. Part 3 is fairly simple. Here again, it's a kind of a certification, whereas auditors, we have to look at the tax ledgers, the GLs, see that what is the actual tax liability as per the GL YTD, or rather for the financial year, and whether we have paid the entire tax liability or not. So there's a tax payable column, then there's a tax paid column. And if there's no gap, then we are good to go. If there's any difference, then we go back again to GST 9, report the differential tax liability paid through DRC 03, and then come back to GST 9C to highlight that this tax liability has been paid. And the last section of GST 9C is the input tax credit. Now from outward, we are moving into the inward side. Now the inward side is more kind of, slightly different, I would say, because the opening line of part 4, the first row item, talks about an adjusted input tax credit. And what it says is that you look at your financial statements and then you derive state level expenses and input tax credit. So this whole part 4 of GST 9C, the beginning point itself is derivation based, because we will not have this kind of state level details of expenses or input tax credit somewhere in the system. So from financial statements, you have to literally derive some estimated financial statement state-wise value, and that has to come as the opening statement, and thereafter all the adjustments come. Now the interesting part is that and it is still a question in my mind at least, that when we look at GST 9C, as I was mentioning some time ago, 9C requires or has given some 9 or 10 categories of expenses. What it says, give me the expense value in the respective head, what was the tax amount, and out of that, what was eligible and what was ineligible, right? And when we look at these expense types, it seems that it's more catering to the goods sector, because these are expenses like transportation expenses, then you have got fuel and surcharge expenses, then you have got rental expenses. And there will definitely be much more expenses in quantum, which might not be forming part of those specified 8-9 categories. Even though 9C has given the last other category where you can add up more rows, but it does not serve any purpose if you ask me, right? If I'm giving expense headwise details in my 9C, the purpose is not achieved, because my input tax credit, I'm already doing reconciliation with 2 month on month and again as part of year-end activity. But then again, if I have to do reconciliation or identify that expense head specific expenses with GST component, it becomes an additional line. And in one of my discussions with one of the GST Council members, he very politely said that Bhupender, the answer is very simple. These are those expense heads which appear in your financial statements. So you just want to make sure that whatever is appearing in your financial statement, are you able to give the same number in 9C or not? Beyond that, everything is part of your two-way reconciliation. And then I had a follow-up question that why you still need that matching with financial statement expense head details. He said it will just give us some comfort that the numbers are 10. That was the answer. So just to get that comfort, authorities have gone ahead and this 9C has not, of course, seen any changes as far as the expense side is considered. But the point is that these expense sets have to be populated. And to the extent possible, of course, we have to vouch for it and we have to review the entire data. It should match with the balance sheet or the financial statement items. If it does not, rest be assured that some automated email or some sort of auto queries will start getting pushed from the GST network. Similar to the outward side, if there's any gap in ITC claim versus ITC appearing in your purchase register, you can always give reasons. Please remember, it's not, how should I put it? It's not illegal to have differences, right? Differences are bound to happen. The thing is that do we, as consultants, and of course for our clients, is the client able to give the reasonable explanation for such differences? If the answer is yes, then yes, differences are justifiable, no questions asked. But if differences are not justifiable, that's where the GST assessments will start picking up. And there will be a time, because of the back-end data management which the government is doing, somewhere all these data points will come on the forefront, and then it will be difficult for anyone to answer for these differences. So let's not be worried or scared about the differences. Let's move on with reasons for such differences. And that is where the fourth bullet says that all these reasons and the differences should be verified and certified by the auditors. Okay, so I think we are slightly running out of time. I'll quickly run through some of the state level TB specific aspects which we have observed in our experience. Sales and procurement, sales and purchases, definitely yes. You really have to kind of look at the segregation of expenses at state level. If the state level segregation is not there, our position which most of the companies have adopted is let's look at my GSTR 2A and GSTR 3B and create a state level trial balance. It is comparatively explainable in absence of any state level trial balance, which many companies might not be prepared. Valuation for deemed supplier, bullet number 2, I think we have already discussed about it. And state-wise values with the return difference, if there is any difference, because the difference could arise not at the time of 9C. The difference will come to the notice of the authorities during GST assessments. They will definitely rely on 9C to begin with, but they will also ask you to give all system generated reports. We are seeing it in few of the live situations down south in Chennai, Bangalore, and also in Navi Mumbai jurisdiction. Looking at the quantum involved, the authorities have asked for system generated reports, or they have requested for an on-site verification with a request that we should give them access to their SAP or TAP. So we have to be kind of mindful that whatever differences are there, we should know what the system, which is the company's or client system, is showing the numbers, and what data we are relying on while we are closing out the nights. In the interest of time, I think we can skip this part. We have already discussed about credit notes, GST as well as commercial. Unbilled revenue, unadjusted advances, and intercompany cross charge. And the last piece is that here self-certification. I know it was a big kind of hue and cry by all the professionals that why 9C self-certification is proposed by the government. It's my kind of assessment is that the self-certification has been made by the government in their own interest, because once the self-certification happens, right, then the government can always go back and say that, okay, I have reduced your burden of work. You don't have to go to any third-party consultant. You know your data, you know your returns, you know your 9C. Why could you have just kind of self-certified the entire 9C? Professionally, I hold a different view, and that's where I think that 9C even though it's optional as of today, which is self-certified or an auditor certification, we should kind of suggest and advise to our clients that they should continue to go ahead with a third party, which is a GST auditor driven approach, because that will give comfort to the client also that some second set or second pair of eyes would have reviewed that data. That's my professional advice and suggestion to my clients and companies are kind of looking into it. And yes, and that's what my input or suggestion to all of you will be. Try to explain the reason of having 9C. Self-certification may lead them into more kind of scrutiny and assessment. And that could be one of the reasons why 9C self-certification is optional as of today and it's not mandatory. So companies still have the chance to go back to the previous option and get 9C certified by an auditor. I guess this is what I had on 9 and 9C. This is just a quick checklist for preparing 9 and 9C. I'll just take a pause here. People who can see the screen and who are hearing some 8 or 9 kind of definite documents which should be there on the table once the 9 and 9C activities kind of kicked off by us as professionals. And then as and when the details come out, then we can look into more details. So I'll just take a pause here. People can read it out and then we can move. Great. So this was all about 9 and 9C. I have taken almost an hour. Frankly, I was not expecting much because the next session will be hopefully more interesting on GST audit and assessment. So if there are any questions, happy to answer, else we can jump on to audit and assessment before we look out for either Karwa Chauth ka Chand or our India-Pakistan bridge.
Sir,
Hello. Yes, sir.
sir, कोई issue?
Rituji, I think you were saying something. I couldn't hear it, sorry.
Sir, you're not audible actually. So please a bit louder.
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So shall we move on to GST audits or is there any questions? Sorry, I didn't see the chat box.
So I think we will take the questions at the end of the
Okay,
session.
fair.
Yeah.
Sure, works fine. All right, so now moving on to the next agenda item, GST audits. Many of you must be going through it or must have heard about it. So what we decided that as part of today's session, as part of the CPE circle, we'll just highlight again what GST audits mean. What are the legal and technical nuances? Trust me when I say it, it's really difficult to kind of change the hats. We have GST 9 and 9C, which is more accountancy or accounting driven. Now we are moving to GST audits, which is more legal and technical driven. So just bear with me in terms of the audits. I'll share my experiences again and what would be the typical issues which we can expect and how to handle those issues come situations. Uh, Let me just start with the very basic, and again, many of us might be aware, but I would still like to highlight it, that under GST law, there's a huge and significant difference in assessment versus audit. So whatever currently is going on from the government department, most of these things are audits. They are not assessment. And the legal framework of assessment and audits is so much so that it is in two separate chapters. So for assessments, you have got chapter 12, while for audits, you have got chapter 13. And the funny part is that in assessment, which is chapter 12, you have got 9 or 10 sections, while in audit, you just got 2 sections. And audit is department driven, while assessment, it begins with your self-assessment, right? The reason why we thought that we'll just touch upon this assessment versus audit as a differentiating factor is that we have to see that 2 different chapters of CGST Act talks about 2 different things, and there is no merging of these the principles in assessments and audits. So someone says that, hey, my audit has started, then there is a separate framework which has to be followed. Vis-a-vis, someone says that my assessment is going on. Now, the difference primarily is in assessment, it all begins with self-assessment. To give you a very routine and daily example, most of the companies since I would say end of 2018 or beginning 2019, they have been receiving these auto-driven emails or some sort of messages that either you have not filed 1 or 3B, or 1 or 3B is not filed, or your data is not matching, which is your ITC, input tax credit vendor reconciliation. All these auto-generated emails seeking clarification is part of assessment, chapter 12. It is not an audit. And if you look at chapter 12 and 13, you will get the clear picture that unless the audit happens, right, no taxpayer can say that the department was well aware of what I was doing, which is from a limitation period perspective. Mere assessment, routine queries will not take us out from a limitation period unless an audit has been completed. So in assessment, as I mentioned, it starts with self-assessment, and it's a routine check of all the returns or the declarations, data, document, which a taxpayer stroke client files on a monthly basis or a periodic basis, right? And basis that assessment of the data as filed by the taxpayer, the department will issue some sort of communication. And again, just to repeat here, it is first step. It is not initiated by the department. It is first done by us as taxpayers as a self-assessment, and department asks follow-up questions, except only in 2 situations, in case of non-filers and unregistered dealers, because in both the situations, they would not have done any kind of self-assessment. There, the tax officers get a right to assess. Again, it is assessment, not an audit. The jurisdiction officer has a right to assess on a best judgment basis for such non-filers or unregistered dealers. And once such self-judgment assessment happens, the audit can still happen. There is no bar in law that if an assessment has happened under chapter 12, an audit cannot happen in chapter 13 and vice versa. Both things can go hand in hand. So in assessment, the interesting part which I was mentioning in terms of the number of sections is that last section, section 63 or section 64, it talks about some sort of a summary assessment. Now, summary assessment is that the tax officer is not aware that, okay, in case of a non-filer, unregistered dealer, or if the data is not submitted, the jurisdictional officer can proceed ahead and pass a summary assessment. Now, summary assessment is effectively in the officer's interest. He thinks that, okay, there could be a potential liability, and to protect that revenue interest, I am passing an assessment order. The parallel example here, I don't know how many of you might have dealt with Delhi VAT in pre-GST era. Delhi VAT had a similar provision, section 32. Section 32 of Delhi VAT provided that the tax officer has a right to do a summary assessment if the information is not provided, and post that the taxpayer can either submit the information or contest the summary assessment. A similar provision is now part and parcel of CGST law, In absence of any information, summary assessment can be initiated. The catch here is that summary assessment cannot happen without prior approval of either the Joint Commissioner or the Additional Commissioner. And this is where a lookout has to be there, that in case any of your clients come to you saying that summary assessment has been initiated, first checkbox is, was it with prior approval of GC or additional, or it is not. If it is not, you can always challenge it and say that that entire summary assessment is bad in law and has to be changed. So this is how the whole assessment kind of proceedings are running, and they are going on for last 3.5 years. As compared to that, audit, which is section 65 onwards, is completely different. Audit is an audit manual has been issued by the Ministry of Finance in consultation with GST Council, given to all state authorities as well as central authorities, and the audit is being picked up by the respective jurisdictional officer. Now, once we look at the audit, it's a full-blown, full-fledged audit. The department has like some 20-25 page audit questionnaire, which has to be filled, starting from the nature of activities the company is doing till the last leg of payment of taxes. Everything has to be given and explained as part of the audit exercise. The interesting part here is that as per section 65, such an audit has to be completed within 3 months, and it can be extended by another 6 months. So in total, you have a 9-month window within which the audit has to be completed. But what the law has done, very smartly, a proviso has been incorporated in section 65, which says that the limitation period of 3 months or 9 months, as the case may be, will trigger from the date when the data is submitted by the taxpayer, or if there is an on-site verification. So let's assume a hypothetical situation. We receive an audit notice on 1st of January, 2021. Ideally, it should be completed by 31st March. But if our client has given the last set of data on 15th March, that 3-month window, 3-month limitation will start from 15th March onwards, which effectively means 15th June. Let's take a step ahead, which is the second part of the proviso. It says on-site verification. Now from 15th March to 10th June, department is sitting quiet. Then suddenly they think that, okay, I'm running out of time. I would do an on-site verification. And on 11th June 21, the officer lands up at the client's premises and he starts his on-site verification. Then the limitation of 3 months will start from 10th June, which is the date of initiation of on-site verification, and not 15th March when we had submitted the entire data set. So the government has effectively got, in any case, almost a year plus minus 2 months here and there to complete an audit. And that is where the proviso attains relevance, or rather it's a kind of a joke on the entire limitation as a principle, because on-site verification is absolutely discretionary. At the 11th hour, the last day when the limitation is expiring, the officer can send you a letter saying that I'm starting on-site verification. So limitation of 3 months, restart. The entire clock restarts. So in my view, this kind of on-site initiation, the law should have, or at least the circular should come out of clarification that on-site verification, the intimation has to happen, say, within 2 weeks from the date the entire data is submitted by the client or the taxpayer. Otherwise, it loses the entire significance. I start an audit in January 21, it will get completed only in Jan 22 or March 22. Then another part is another part of this entire audit in chapter 13 is special audit. I think it was there in service tax era as well, and it continues to be there even today. It is an audit which is undertaken by professionals like chartered accountants and cost accountants, where the authorities feel that the data is either complex or the transaction volume could be high, where the jurisdictional officer cannot do it. So they engage a chartered accountant or a cost accountant to undertake this kind of audit. The difference is a special audit has to be mandatorily completed within 3 months. There is no extension by 6 months, no on-site initiation and other things. Within 3 months, it has to be completed. In my experience, I have seen, a few of the firms who were not able to complete it. And actually, I have kind of, read some communication from the Commission Lower Parel office, sending out to the firm that if it doesn't get completed within remaining 15 or 20 days, then the firm's contract will expire and it might get blacklisted. So in case if someone is appointed as a special auditor for GST purposes, you are not getting data. Please reach out to the appointing officer, who's the commissioner, or keep sending reminders to the taxpayer so that everyone is aware in the ecosystem that exactly we as professionals are not aware. So this was the difference between assessment versus audit. Just to summarize, one does not mean the other will not happen. Both things can happen hand in hand. They have different contours, different ideologies, and they will get completed. This is my favorite. Now data is the new danda. Government has the complete data, right? And as widely reported in newspapers and media as well, including Pegasus, the one of the major, if I have to call it as a scandal. But yeah, this is where the government's eyes and ears are always open. They have data from income tax, which is your income tax returns and the income tax department. They have got data from GST. They have got data in case of import from ISCAPE, which is customs. So effectively what government is doing at the back end, they effectively reconcile all these three data sets, and any gap which comes out, they're identifying it and then immediately sending the gap as a part of the notice. So we have to be very careful while we are kind of finalizing our annual returns, income tax returns, or any kind of import export related transactions, that the data remains the exact correct data, what it means to. Any gap in data, government will get to know basis the data analytics team, and they are investing a lot on this backend data analytics, which is also visible from the number of cases government has kind of picked up, where many arrests have been made in last year and a half. Now coming to this data as a primary requirement, the biggest challenge for professionals like us is that you will very rarely, rather, you will find one spot or one individual in the company who would be responsible for the entire data. So what would happen is that we'll end up dealing with multiple stakeholders to get data set which ultimately goes to the same result, which is financial versus GST return. But the thing is that because there are multiple stakeholders, we have to make sure that all those stakeholders are duly and timely informed about the expectations what we have. And also the timelines, which is the second point, because in last 2.5 months, the GST authorities are putting a lot of pressure on clients to submit data within the given time frame. And if the data is not submitted, they're literally threatening to directly issue a show cause notice. And if a show cause notice gets issued, the overall impact is on the balance sheet, because then the statutory auditor will ask questions and this entire discussions will keep on happening. So within the given timelines, maybe a couple of weeks extension by the department should be there, but the data has to be completed, keeping in mind all the stakeholders which are involved. In few of the companies, SME sector included, we have also seen that there are certain SOPs, standard operating processes for data management. So any data which is tax related data or finance related data which is relevant for audit and assessment, whether it's income tax or it is in relation to GST, the SOPs make sure that the data is properly captured, it is saved and stored, and it is easily accessible. Right. So those kind of SOPs, if possible, we should kind of try to explain to the client that those are really needed, because there will be time when the GST authorities will give us a shorter period of time to complete an audit. And in that shorter period of time, we'll have no option but to kind of give all the responses. And definitely linking it with the first part, the multiple stakeholders, the entire work has to be done as a project. So now, when I say project, it's not just multiple stakeholders, but if a client has multi-state presence, we also have to ensure that in all those states, the correct information, the same information from a business tax perspective is going to the officers. It should not happen that someone is saying a thing in Maharashtra, same company in Delhi, that person in Delhi is saying something altogether different. Because if that so happens, somewhere eventually both the state GST officers will get the details, and any disconnect, they will just have their kind of repercussions. So this entire project management is multiple stakeholders, definitely yes, but also multiple states where the chances of gap in information or understanding could be. For the ease of reference and for everyone's quick kind of a lookout, what we have done is we have just populated a very brief, quick checklist of documents. It's other than what is part and parcel of audit manual. What we have seen is that GST 990, of course, it's there, But there are certain documents which the authorities have started asking for it again and again. Now 9 and 9C, as I mentioned, it's the starting point. Even though the government has it on the government portal, but they will still ask us to submit it. So the finalized version of 9.9C should be there in my experience. See if you can get the backup of 9 and 9C also. Because many a times what I have seen is that, when the officer asks some question, okay, in terms of his understanding of the numbers, and when we compare with the last file 9 and 9C, there could be some gap. But when we look at the intermediate working files, the question asked by the officer would be somewhere responded or somewhere being looked at by the client and us in those working files. So suggestion is 9.9C for submission, but backup workings for our own sake so that the queries can be responded faster. In the first audit, the Tran one is being picked up left, right, and center. No questions asked. Everything has to be proven as per the invoices, documents, and data. If it is not being proven in one of the live cases, we have already received a show cause notice, wherein some goods related invoices pre-GST, we were not able to find, and the department has disallowed, and they have stated that the ITC has to be reversed with interest. So wherever Tran 1 has been filed, it's being picked up as part of the audit activity. ITC 02, I'll just pick it up with M&A details. During the financial year, if there's any merger and acquisition between the group companies, unrelated companies, so on and so forth, the department is specifically inquiring, number one, what kind of merger was there, merger or demerger, or any kind of amalgamation. What was the financial consideration for such merger, demerger, and related transactions? And what was the GST impact given post-merger, which is a credit transfer? Right? And the worst part is that if someone is kind of tagged with state authorities, and if that someone is a service industry, then it's becoming really difficult for us to explain to state authorities in most of the states that how a merger and acquisition deal happens in a service industry. So there are multiple layers of questions, multiple queries which are coming up because the intangible portion in a service industry is quite a lot, whether on a normal routine basis or in case of a merger and acquisition transaction. YTD year-to-date GSTR 2A reconciliation, definitely yes, because that will determine that whether the credit was entitled, not entitled, or if there could be any queries. And the last piece is, again, even though government will have some data, they will still ask for income tax return, 26AS, trial balance, any 3CAB, CD, all these forms, which would have been filed as compliance by the taxpayer under other laws, including some of the RBI related information. And in case of software exporter companies, the department is also asking on Softex forms. And the reason is that through Softex form, what they're trying to do is that if there is any non-compliance, they're at least highlighting that non-compliance, saying ABC Limited did not file their Softex. That does not happen, that gets reported, and when the same ABC Limited goes to file a refund claim, they ask question that where is your Softex form? So if they're not just restricting themselves only to the specific GST related aspects, but they're also looking beyond GST. We are going back again and again requesting the authorities that beyond GST is not their jurisdiction, it's not their domain. But their standard responses, we are just looking into it. If you don't have anything to hide, why you are not submitting the data? So we are giving in full kind of faith and to buy some peace for ourselves. We are giving their data, but in case they go beyond jurisdiction, we have to be mindful because that has to be represented properly, responded correctly, and of course, in worst case situation, it has to be litigated to the extent possible. Now, jumping onto the specifics of GST audit. First and foremost, I think in last 6 to maybe 8-9 months, the GST audits have begun, no doubt about it. And this is the first time when GST audits are happening since July 17. So we are being extra careful, extra cautious, because whatever happens in this first set of GST audit, that is going to lay the path for that company, for that taxpayer, for future years GST audit. So no one, including the client side, should take it lightly that, okay, we'll give some data, we'll not give some data. We should be totally prepared, completely, aware about what's happening, and we should submit the correct information. Because once, God forbid, if something gets tagged as a wrongdoing or incorrectness by the company, then subsequent year, it will start from that wrongdoing and then it will go on the right tracks. On-site audit by the department, because of unfortunate COVID impact, the on-site audit did not start at the beginning. Now it is picking up. And during on-site audit, it is yet to be seen to what extent or to what depth the authorities are going to go. Because in service tax and excise, the on-site audit, rarely they would have asked for system access. But in GST, it's becoming, a norm that they are asking for access to the systems. Another one, which is kind of giving us some troubles, is advanced rulings, right? So I am a regular company, taxpayer company. Some other company in the same industry filed an advanced ruling and it has gone against that company. The GST authorities are picking up that negative ruling and blindly applying on it. So we have to be really mindful that when we are submitting any data, I'm not saying that we should not submit any data, but when we are submitting the data, we should be aware any kind of advanced rulings, because rest be assured, those advanced rulings are definitely known or they are in the knowledge of the GST authorities. So they will try to pick those negative ones and try to fasten some additional tax liability on the taxpayers. And today's world is world of information, data flow. Negative advanced ruling is, and when it gets announced, it gets published all over the world. So people are aware about those rulings. So be mindful and careful about such advanced rulings and legally prepare your case. That okay, exactly how you are going to defend it in case the question comes on such advanced rulings. Center versus state, I think it was an anticipated kind of challenge which has been in there since July 17. Central authorities and state authorities approach to GST audits are completely different. Central authorities, they are still more understanding because they have seen service regime as well as goods regime. It's more difficult with state authorities, and I'm hopeful that another 6 to 12 months state authorities will also understand it better, the service sector impact and how it has to be seen from an audit requirement. And the audit manual guidelines have been issued and released by the central government. Few states have adopted. We as Maharashtra, we have clearly said in a communication 6 or maybe 8 months back that we are not bound by the central government's audit manual guidelines. Still 60 to 80%, 60 to 70% Maharashtra state government is also following the same approach, but they're definitely asking for some additional requirements or documents. When we look at the GST audit framework, I'll just touch upon one point here, or rather 2 points, second and third. How the audits are being picked up. Okay, the audits are being picked up properly on risk management system, which is RMS. The government has, as I've been saying in last half an hour or so, government has complete data, your customer, yourself, and your vendors. In this entire chain of events, vendor, yourself, and the customer, if there's any one kind of weak link, one party who has not complied properly, and you are stuck because of that party, most likely than not, the audit will get initiated against you. And I'll give you another of my client situation. What had happened is that one of their vendors was a GST non-compliant. For them, GST non-compliant vendor, my client had already paid the entire invoice value, including GST, to that vendor. And he became non-compliant within 2 to 3 months' time. So as a company, they were not able to do that in real-time check. Now, it turns out that vendor apparently had committed some multi-crore input tax credit kind of a fraud. Instead of asking our client about the details of the vendor, what they did, they sent this whole transaction details, and the CEO of our client, he got a summon from the economic offense wing. The GST authorities positioned the case to the economic offense wing, saying that Mr. A is the vendor, Mr. B is their client, which is our client. Mr. A has raised an invoice with GST, but it seems B has not received such goods, and it's a fraud where credit has been claimed incorrectly by B, our client. The CEO got the summons, and we just got onto a call. And within 2 to 3 days, we had that entire data chain, data flow within the system, because it was all the transactions were genuine. We had GRN, goods received details, we had invoices, payments, and related aspects. But it took us almost 2 weeks to convince and explain that economic offense wing inspector that there was nothing wrong in those transactions. So the message I have is that we really don't know which department is talking to which department, from where the communication will come. So in case some random department unknown or a fearsome department communication comes, don't just be worried. Just literally get into the facts and see if everything is clear. It will take time, but eventually you will save it. But if there's any kind of hesitance in submitting the data, the economic offense wing guys are absolutely brutal. My personal experience, because even though it's based out of Mazgaon office, but it is headed by Maharashtra police, right? So they work in the manner a policeman works, right? So just be mindful about what kind of data and information you are submitting. Be very sure about with yourselves that the data is correct. And the second point which I wanted to highlight in this framework is the e-monitoring. Government is keeping full track of how many audits and assessments are open, where there could be potential liability, and definitely yes, which companies could be or might be in the wrong side of the law, either on the outward side or on the input tax side. Just for, I think, just from a point of completeness perspective, I have just populated these 3 stages. It's something similar to what we have seen in good old days, pre-GST era, service tax, excise, or VAT. It's a pre-audit, ongoing audit, which is the commencement of the audit, and the closure of the audit, which is post-audit. At all these 3 stages, the first stage is totally and absolutely data and information. Pre-audit, you really have to kind of comply with the departmental requirements. What data has been sought for, what are we submitting, and in what form and fashion we are submitting. The second stage is, in my professional view, slightly crucial, because what happens is that in the second stage, if there is no query, nothing going on, life is easy. But if the departmental officer raises any query which is technical in nature, we have to make sure that it is properly represented and the submissions which are being made to the authorities, they are thorough and it covers all the legal aspects also. Because if something gets missed out, then the authorities can always go back and say that I had highlighted this query to the taxpayer. His response was incomplete or it was not up to the mark. And that is where here is my demand notice. So he can take a ground that the taxpayer was not able to justify or explain his stand, and hence the demand is sustainable. So extremely important and crucial that during the second stage where the queries are coming to us or to our clients, we should submit legal and factual information absolutely start to, so that we try to give as many explanations as many possible, so that as and when the final audit report comes, if it culminates into show cause notice, there is a larger legal ground that show cause notice has been issued without application of right. So if we have to justify or take this ground of without application of mind, we have to make sure that in the second stage or the second step, our submissions are thorough and up to date. Now moving on to the last piece. So as I have been saying that, this entire GST audit is effectively department driven. It starts with the data gathering, comes into this whole clarifications and explanations and queries. And now in last, I think 2019 mid or 2019 end, government has also released a circular or issued a circular where they have said that before issuance of any show cause notice, all the tax officers are bound to do a pre-consultation approach, which effectively means that before demand notice comes, you will get a communication that we intend to raise a demand on XYZ reasons. We want to issue a pre-consultation notice, which means you are required to give your explanation. And if your explanation is correct, incorrect, depending upon the pre-consultation outcome only, the show cause notice can be issued. In my experience so far in last year and a half or 2 years, pre-consultation is just an eyewash. Whatever data you submit, even you have submitted the clear information, legal grounds also in pre-consultation and the show cause notice are 90% similar. In 2 of my own matters, we have already approached the High Court, requesting the High Court that in the garb of pre-consultation is just a check the box approach. Departmental authorities are not looking at my submissions properly. And it's a clear case of a biased approach, and hence the entire proceedings should be quashed. So there are situations where we really have to reach out to the High Court and get the favorable relief or outcome, but totally depend on case to case. But in any case, as a process, the departmental authorities are bound to follow this pre-consultation approach. So from data submission to submission of reply to the queries, pre-consultation, if nothing comes favorable, then the last stage comes as a show cause notice, which is part of this section 4 on recovery proceedings. Now, historically, at least in India, we have all recovery matters categorized in two parts. Non-fraudulent, which is where absolutely clean and clear, vis-a-vis fraudulent. Now, this section on recovery of dues of 73, 74, it runs into almost a page. What I have done, I've taken a few key pointers for non-fraudulent matters and fraudulent matters, and we'll just highlight that, okay, exactly how this whole process runs and what are the advantages, disadvantages in case someone wants to contest any kind of matter. Right. So when we first talk about the non-fraudulent matter, what the law provides that pre-consultation, everything completed, we are at that stage. If a show cause notice has to be issued, then it has to be issued 3 months prior to completion of 3 years from the date of filing of GSTR 9. Okay. Now, this is quite interesting, and I'll tell you why. When 17, 18 GSTR 9 and 9C, the dates are getting extended, and extended. In one of the seminars organized by SOCHM, I had just highlighted it at that point in time in 2018 and 2018 end, that with the extension, the entire business fraternity is happy, including, of course, us as professionals. But what people are missing out is that more we delay in filing GSTR 9, longer I am extending my limitation period. Because in a normal case where there's no fraud suppression, all those requirements are not there, the department is bound to issue a show cause notice, which is linked with the date of filing of GSTR. What used to happen in service tax and excise from the date of filing of my return. In case of service tax half yearly, in case of excise monthly, right? Now here, if for any reason I have not filed my GSTR 9, or I have delayed, or the government has given extension, my normal limitation period is automatically extended. So look at a situation for the financial year 17-18. If someone filed their returns, say in December 2019, in a normal situation for 17-18, by March 21, the limitation period would have got expired. But now we are looking at a situation for 17-18, the normal limitation period is still 1 year from today. Right? So in my personal view, any extension of 9 and 9C, because of this limitation period, is absolutely unwarranted, because it's going to come back and hit us hard. And the same logic is there in fraudulent matters. The limitation period is again linked. Hello. Sorry, am I audible now? Hello. Ankush bhai, am I audible? I'm not able to get that. Okay, all right, sorry. Okay, so going back to our discussion topic. So in any case, my limitation period is effectively GSTR 9 driven, right? So my personal view is that try your best to file GSTR 9 in the first time limit, which is 31st December of subsequent financial year, because that is going to help you and your client in long run. Okay. So the limitation period going back, again, it's 6 months prior to completion of 3 years. 3 months prior to completion of 3 years from the date of filing GSTR 9. And let's assume a particular issue, hypothetically, the tax rate being 18% instead of 12%, that gets picked up in the first audit. For the subsequent period, there is no requirement to issue a show cause notice. What the law provides, that a subsequent period demand notice will be issued in the form of a statement. Now, when we say statement, it's nothing, just maybe 1 or 2 pager letter without any audit, without pre-consultation, nothing. Simply that in the previous year, there was a dispute of 12 versus 18. This year, we see you are still paying at 12%. So here is the demand for the subsequent financial year, pay tax at 12%. Okay. So the responsibility and obligation of the authorities is to put all their efforts, or rather all their might, in the first notice. Thereafter, it could very well be recurring either in terms of input tax credit or on the outward tax slab. So once the show cause notice is issued, typically a show cause notice with interest and penalty. But as far as non-fraudulent matters are concerned, the law provides that there shall not be levied any penalty if tax and interest is paid within 30 days of show cause notice. But if someone still wants to contest, thinking that, okay, let me try my luck, maybe the jurisdictional officer or the commissioner of appeals will understand. And he contested, then his penalty, and he loses, of course, if he loses, the penalty can still be kept at 10%. So at the first stage of litigation, the companies can take a call that 10% penalty is not significant enough. So rather fight it out, see how the final order comes out, which is the either the adjudicating authority's order or the commissioner of appeal order. And if that order is not properly worded, you can take your chances, fight it out in tribunal, high court, supreme court. But if the order is absolutely properly worded and there is less scope, you can still get off the hook by paying only 10% of penalty. No doubt, tax and interest has to be paid. But this waiver in penalty, 10% or absolutely zero, is not applicable in two cases where someone has not paid tax altogether, or he has paid, he has collected tax, but he has not deposited that tax. Okay. So in this situation, the waiver from penalty is not there, irrespective, the taxpayer has to pay penalty at the rate of 10%. Now coming to the fraudulent matters, right? Now fraudulent matters, I'll just highlight two aspects. One is the limitation period and another one is the change in penalty. So the limitation period is 6 months from completion of 5 years. So in non-fraudulent, it was 3 years. In fraudulent matters, the limitation is 5 years. So effectively, if I look at it for a financial year of 17-18, let's assume I filed my returns on 31st December 2018, right? You add up another 5 years, so 23. So you are looking at 17-18 financial year getting closed out on or before March 23. That's the time period we are looking at, right? And most likely than not, we have seen it in the past also. Wherever the limitation period is getting breached, the tax authorities will highlight one reason or another to say that there was a fraud, suppression, misrepresentation. Okay. Now, in cases of fraudulent matter, there is no concept of no penalty. If someone pays tax with interest before show cause notice, he will still end up paying penalty either equivalent to the tax amount or 15%. The provision starts that you have to pay penalty equivalent to tax amount, but then it carves out a proviso or 15%, whichever is lower. And just like in the previous matter, if someone contests in the first stage, right, then if the show cause notice is issued and you have not paid tax and interest, then within 30 days of show cause notice, you pay 30% penalty. And if you contest and you get the first order, after first order, you have to mandatorily pay 50% penalty. In my view, if someone falls into 30% or 50% bracket, he would rather fight it out till the end rather than kind of, just taking this benefit. The interesting part here, and the first time in the indirect taxes, at least of India, is that Section 74 specifically defines what do you mean by suppression, and it is a hilarious definition. I've just kind of extracted in the red font at the bottom of the screen. Suppression means non-declaration of facts or information which is required to be furnished in a return or a statement or as asked by the officer. Now, what it simply means, if I have to put it differently, officer asks me, okay, please give me your form 26AS. I tell him that, okay, you are not required to look into 26AS, and I do not submit it. As per the law, it becomes a suppression because in the last part is information not submitted, which is asked by the officer. Another situation, my input tax credit details, or maybe outward, there is some sort of inadvertent error, and which I eventually rectify. But during the monthly return cycle, I could not give that data or information. As per Section 74, it still amounts to suppression. So the definition of suppression is so vast that a missing piece of information can mean suppression. And this, in my view, is absolutely draconian in nature, because there are many reasons where information is either not provided because it's irrelevant, or inadvertent errors happening in returns, where the worst part is 1 and 3B cannot be amended. Right. So in all these situations, doesn't mean I've suppressed any facts. It simply means it's a human error. All of us are human beings. So down south, we have filed a writ petition, not in terms of challenging suppression definition, but we are saying that GSTR 1 and 3B amendment facility should be made functional urgently. And by the way, because that amendment is not possible, I am incorrectly tagged as a company who is suppressing the facts. So we are trying to achieve it in a different form and fashion. Let's see how the outcome comes up. So this was all about, show cause notice, sorry, audits, pre-consultation, show cause notice, and recovery. The real nightmare is like this. Now, in last 2.5 years, many matters have been adjudicated till Commissioner Appeals level. Okay, as per Section 109, any matter where any appeal has to be filed against Commissioner Appeal, it has to be filed before the GST tribunal. The unfortunate part is GST tribunal is not yet set up. It's 4.5 years, and we are heading into the completion of 5th year of GST. But still, there is no sight of GST tribunal. My worst fear is not that tribunals are not set up. My worst fear is that now audits have started picking up. In next 6 to 9 months, most of the things will get adjudicated in Commissioner or maybe Commissioner Appeals, and then we have to go to the tribunal. If tribunals are not properly set up and they are not functional, we are looking at this wave of litigation which will start now, and the pending matters since, if not July 17, at least December 17. So the tribunal will start its functioning with a heavy load of cases, pendency matters. And with that pending matters, I don't know how anyone expects the tribunals to give a faster and quick kind of outcome. And if not, companies are going and they'll continue to reach out to the High Court, which will ultimately kind of burden the High Courts. And that is what a PIL was filed before the Supreme Court by one of the advocates based out of Delhi, saying that in absence of GST tribunals, companies are going to the High Court. It's burdening the High Court and it is having a rippling effect. Now, Supreme Court has kind of already passed a remark, I think somewhere in July or August 21, asking the central government to set up the tribunals immediately, but till date there is no news. There's an expectation maybe by this year end or early next year, which is Jan Feb, the tribunals will be set up, but currently we don't know where it is heading. Just as a passing reference, not related to GST, but otherwise, for all other tribunals, including NCLAT, SEBI, SAT, which is SEBI Appellate Tribunal, and other tribunals, government had notified tribunals reforms, rationalization, conditional services ordinance 2021. This is the same bill which was struck down by the Supreme Court in Jan Feb 21. In June, July, again the same law, just differently worded, has been kind of passed by the lower house of the parliament. And Justice Chandrachud has made a very nasty remark, saying that if the government does not look into our orders, why we kind of struck down a particular law as unconstitutional and incorrect, and they introduce the same law with a different title, as Supreme Court, we are not pleased. So the Supreme Court has struck down again the same law and it's gone back to the government. Let's see eventually how this tribunal rules come out. But as I mentioned, this is totally different than your GST tribunals. GST tribunals are yet to be set up, and we really have to see that how things pan out from there. Great. Well, I think just in time from my side, this is what I had on GST audits and assessments. Again, I think the larger thing is, as I mentioned in one of the slides, it's all data driven, at least as of today. But definitely next month or maybe 1.5 months, once the actual data exercise or activity is completed, it will be absolutely legal process driven, wherein the proper submissions, drafting, and maybe Commissioner Appeal Tribunal, High Court, and other courts have to be kind of looked at to find a faster solution to our client. So I'll just take a pause here and now maybe we can take questions. I'll check the chat box once.
So there are few
We have-
questions in the chat
yes.
box.
Sure.
So many auditors, that is done. What is the remedy for ITC disallowed on the basis not available on 2A? Dealer received notice in ASMT 10 now. Can we justify by submitting valid documents like invoices and related documents? Person who has made supplies has put the sales record under B2C instead of B2B for the year 17-18. Suggest defensive reply.
Okay, so see, if something is not appearing in GST 2, and it's our experience not just in audit but even in the refund matters, right? The departmental authorities are outrightly rejecting the input tax credit, even though we have kind of given in hard copy the invoice copies. proof of payment to the vendor also. But the departmental point of view is very simple, that because it's not appearing in 2A, I cannot trust anyone in the system, so I'm going to deny it. The only way to kind of handle it is highlight the issues, which I think you just mentioned, B2B versus B2C. And if the jurisdictional officer is not agreeing, take it up till the commissioner level. See what response he gives, right? If the amount is significant and you get a negative kind of response, rest be assured, you can kind of reach out to the High Court. You can rely on Bharti Airtel Delhi High Court ruling, which has highlighted that all system-driven challenges or problems, the taxpayer should not be kind of fastened with the liability. So, basis that you can reach out to the commissioner, try to resolve, try to get to a solution. If not, unfortunately, High Court is the only resort as of now.
So the next question is, can assessing officer deny our claims of valid ITC only on the basis of it is not reflected in 2A?
Absolutely, yes. And they are doing it. That's the harsh reality, but that's how practically they are doing it. If something is not appearing in 2A, they are outrightly denying. And in one of my client situation, the problem was that in 2A it was appearing as IGST. In my books, as per the invoice, I had taken it as CGST and SGST. And we are fighting it out at the commercial level, Lower Parel, Mumbai, where we are saying that it was just an error by the vendor. Look at my document, look at my invoice, look at the payment. It was an intrastate transaction, and I have correctly taken a CNS, CGST and SGST. But because the vendor reported it as IGST, I should not be kind of disallowed. The on-ground response is that IGST goes to the central government, while C&S goes differently. So I cannot avoid the problem.
Sir, here I would like to add my query as well. Sir, we have taken credit for example, say 2021. And the in 2B, it reflected in the month of June in the next financial year. Also, we didn't see it. I mean, somehow it got skipped, not reconciled. And the September month also return has been gone. Now the department, if it issues notices that you have taken in the month of March credit and it is reflected in the month of June, whether I have to reverse it, so it will impact my ITC will be gone because September month also has gone, right? And department will charge interest on it as well.
Absolutely. So there, with this introduction of 2B,
Right, 2B.
again, correct. So again, legally, and it's unfortunate, it's, literally squeezing all the taxpayer from all sides. That's the problem. So with 2B, what the government is trying to do is that forget now 2A also. Whatever is appearing in 2B, you are entitled only to that much credit. Okay. They have got another weapon to disallow credit to the taxpayers. Basis 2B, they will definitely disallow it. What ground you can take in case from March to, let's say, September, the interim period, if you had sufficient balance in your electronic credit ledger, put up a ground that there is no revenue loss. Even if you would not have taken that credit in March and would have taken it, say, June or September, you still had sufficient credit, and hence there was no cash outflow from your side for the tax liability.
But so
That's
what
the
they say is, the department people say is, ki you need to reverse it and then you should have taken it in the month of
Absolutely.
September.
September, that's right. So they're reading
But
2B, in a very strict manner. Currently, I know some of the companies have already made a representation to the government. And if I'm not wrong, between FICCI or SOCHAM, a representation has landed up at Minister of Finance also, that if something is appearing in 2A, 2B should be a secondary check, not the primary check. But as of now, at the ground level, no one is listening, and it is going to go into litigation for sure.
thank you so much, sir. Can ITC be denied only on the ground basis where the amount wrongly filled in the wrong head while filing 3B? Say ITC of import filled in all other ITC.
Right. Okay, so in this case, ITC eventually will not be denied. To begin with, of course, the query will come. Once you give the statement in terms of, it was incorrect head, okay, and you give the complete supporting documents and backup, they are going to allow the credit. In our experience, not exactly in the same situation, but in cases, where, let's say at the back end, your credit has been blocked. We give all the data and information, the officer will review it, and we have seen situation within 2 to 3 weeks, the credit was unapproved. So here also, there's no revenue loss, there's no revenue leakage. It's just the procedural lapse wherein the credit has been reported into the incorrect tax cell, and hence the officer should allow it.
Okay, sir. I think that answers all the queries. Members, I would request, this is the last chance for you guys to put up your questions and get your answers done. Sir, there is a thank you note from our Sandeep sir, a past convener of Bhinder CP Study Circle. Many thanks for replying to all our questions.
Anytime, Sandeepji, pleasure is all mine. I hope that the session was quite insightful, and I provided
sir,
some
it
of
was
the
indeed,
ground
sir.
realities.
No, sir, it was indeed with the practical exposure that you have given was icing on the cake, sir. So now
Thank
I
you,
would request our convener, Madam Ritu Agarwal, to please give formal vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Sheetal. Good noon, one and all present here. It is such an honor to present vote of thanks to such a learned speaker. On behalf of Bhinder CP Study Circle, I extend my gratitude to our today's speaker, Advocate Bhupendra Singh Ji, for taking out time from his busy schedule and grace this VCM. Sir, it's indeed a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for giving us insight of the topic with examples. Your detailed explanations to the sections made it easy to understand. And also, I want to thank you for addressing our queries. Thank you so much. I would also express my gratitude to all the members for their presence and contribution to make this VCM a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sheetal.
Thank you once
Thanks,
again, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhupendra ji.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Hmm.